The German Empire was the historical German nation-state that existed from the unification of Germany in 1871 to the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II in November 1918, when Germany became a federal republic. The German Empire consisted of 27 constituent territories, with most being ruled by royal families. This included 4 kingdoms, 6 grand duchies, 6 duchies, 7 principalities, 3 free Hanseatic cities, and 1 imperial territory. Although the Kingdom of Prussia contained most of the empire's population and territory, it played a lesser role. Histoire points out, Prussia's political and cultural influence had diminished considerably by the 1890s. After 1850, the states of Germany had rapidly become industrialized, with particular strengths in coal, iron, chemicals, and railways. In 1871 it had a population of 41 million people, and by 1913 this had increased to 68 million. A heavily rural collection of states, in 1815, the United Germany became predominantly urban. During its 47 years of existence, the German Empire operated as an industrial, technological, and scientific giant, gaining more Nobel Prizes in science than any other country. Germany became a great power, boasting a rapidly growing rail network, the world's strongest army, and a fast-growing industrial base. In less than a decade, its navy became second only to Britain's Royal Navy. When the Great Crisis of 1914 arrived, the German Empire had only one ally, Austria-Hungary. They were later joined by the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria to form the Central Powers, a quadruple alliance. In the First World War, German plans to capture Paris quickly in autumn 1914 failed, and the war on the Western Front became a stalemate. The Allied naval blockade caused severe shortages of food. Germany was repeatedly forced to send troops to bolster Austria and Turkey on other fronts. However, Germany had great success on the Eastern Front. It occupied large eastern territories following the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. German declaration of unrestricted submarine warfare in early 1917 was designed to strangle the British. It failed because of the use of a transatlantic convoy system. But the declaration, along with the Zimmermann telegram, did bring the United States into the war. Meanwhile, German civilians and soldiers had become war-weary and radicalized by the Russian Revolution. The High Command under Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff increasingly controlled the country, as they gambled on one last offensive in spring 1918 before the Americans could arrive in force, using large numbers of troops, aeroplanes and artillery withdrawn from the Eastern Front. This failed, and by October the armies were in retreat. The Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman Empire had collapsed, and the German people had lost faith in the political system. The empire collapsed in the November 1918 revolution as the emperor and all the ruling monarchs abdicated, and the republic took over. Background: the German Confederation had been created by an act of the Congress of Vienna on 8 June 1815 as a result of the Napoleonic Wars. After being alluded to in Article 6 of the 1814 Treaty of Paris, German nationalism rapidly shifted from its liberal and democratic character in 1848, called Pan-Germanism, to Prussian Prime Minister Otto von Bismarck's pragmatic realpolitik. Bismarck sought to extend Hohenzollern hegemony throughout the German states, to cement unification of the German states and the elimination of Prussia's rival, Austria, from the subsequent empire. He envisioned a conservative, Prussian-dominated Germany. 3 wars led to military successes and helped to persuade German people to do this. The Second War of Schleswig against Denmark in 1864, the Austro-Prussian War in 1866, and the Franco-Prussian War against France in 1870–71. The German Confederation ended as a result of the Austro-Prussian War of 1866 between the constituent Confederation entities of the Austrian Empire and its allies on one side and the Kingdom of Prussia and its allies on the other. The war resulted in the Confederation being partially replaced by a North German Confederation in 1867, comprising the 22 states north of the Main. The patriotic fervor generated by the Franco-Prussian War overwhelmed the remaining opposition in the 4 states south of the Main to a unified Germany, and during November 1870 they joined the North German Confederation by treaty. Foundation of the German Empire. On 10 December 1870 the North German Confederation Reichstag renamed the Confederation as the German Empire and gave the title of German Emperor to William I, the King of Prussia, as Bundespräsidium of the Confederation. The new constitution and the title Emperor came into effect on 1 January 1871. During the Siege of Paris on 18 January 1871, William accepted to be proclaimed emperor in the Hall of Mirrors at the palaces of Versailles. The Second German Constitution was adopted by the Reichstag on 14 April 1871 and proclaimed by the Emperor on 16 April, which was substantially based upon Bismarck's North German Constitution. The political system remained the same. The empire had a parliament called the Reichstag, which was elected by universal male suffrage. However, the original constituencies drawn in 1871 were never redrawn to reflect the growth of urban areas. As a result, by the time of the great expansion of German cities in the 1890s and first decade of the 20th century, rural areas were grossly overrepresented. Legislation also required the consent of the Bundesrat, the Federal Council of Deputies from the 27 states. Executive power was vested in the Emperor, or Kaiser, who was assisted by a Chancellor responsible only to him. The Emperor was given extensive powers by the Constitution. He alone appointed and dismissed the Chancellor, was Supreme Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, final arbiter of all foreign affairs, and could also disband the Reichstag to call for new elections. Officially, the Chancellor was a one-man cabinet and was responsible for the conduct of all state affairs. In practice, the state secretaries acted as unofficial portfolio ministers. The Reichstag had the power to pass, amend or reject bills and to initiate legislation. However, as mentioned above, in practice the real power was vested in the Emperor, who exercised it through his Chancellor. Although nominally a federal empire and league of equals, in practice the empire was dominated by the largest and most powerful state, Prussia. It stretched across the northern two-thirds of the new Reich and contained 3/5 of its population. The imperial crown was hereditary in the House of Hohenzollern, the ruling House of Prussia, with the exception of the years 1872 to 1873 and 1892 to 1894. The Chancellor was always simultaneously the Prime Minister of Prussia. With 17 out of 58 votes in the Bundesrat, Berlin needed only a few votes from the small states to exercise effective control. The other states retained their own governments, but had only limited aspects of sovereignty. For example, both postage stamps and currency were issued for the empire as a whole. Coins through 1 mark were also minted in the name of the empire, while higher-valued pieces were issued by the states. However, these larger gold and silver issues were virtually commemorative coins and had limited circulation. while the states issued their own declarations and some had their own armies. The military forces of the smaller ones were put under Prussian control. Those of the larger states, such as the kingdoms of Bavaria and Saxony, were coordinated along Prussian principles and would in wartime be controlled by the federal government. The evolution of the German Empire is somewhat in line with parallel developments in Italy, which became a United Nations state a decade earlier. Some key elements of the German Empire's authoritarian political structure were also the basis for conservative modernization in Imperial Japan under Meiji and the preservation of an authoritarian political structure under the Tsars in the Russian Empire. One factor in the social anatomy of these governments had been the retention of a very substantial share in political power by the landed elite, the Junkers, resulting from the absence of a revolutionary breakthrough by the peasants in combination with urban areas. Although authoritarian in many respects, the empire had some democratic features. Besides universal suffrage, it permitted the development of political parties. Bismarck's intention was to create a constitutional facade which would mask the continuation of authoritarian policies. In the process, he created a system with a serious flaw. There was a significant disparity between the Prussian and German electoral systems. Prussia used a highly restrictive three-class voting system in which the richest third of the population could choose 85% of the legislature, all but assuring a conservative majority. As mentioned above, the king and the prime minister of Prussia were also the emperor and chancellor of the empire, meaning that the same rulers had to see majorities from legislatures elected from completely different franchises. Universal suffrage was significantly diluted by the gross overrepresentation of rural areas from the 1890s onward. By the turn of the century, the urban-rural balance was completely reversed. From 1871, more than two-thirds of the empire's people lived in cities and towns. Germany's industrial power. For 30 years, Germany struggled against Britain to be Europe's leading industrial power, though both fell behind the United States on the global stage. Representative of Germany's industry was the steel giant Krupp, whose first factory was built in Estland. By 1902, the factory alone became a great city with its own streets, its own police force, fire department and traffic laws. There are 150 kilometers of rail, 60 different factory buildings, 8,500 machine tools, 7 electrical stations, 140 kilometers of underground cable and 46 overhead. Under Bismarck, Germany was a world innovator in building the welfare state. German workers enjoyed health, accident and maternity benefits, canteens, changing rooms and a national pension scheme. Constituent states. Before unification, German territory was made up of 27 constituent states. These states consisted of kingdoms, grand duchies, principalities, free Hanseatic cities and one imperial territory. The free cities had a republican form of government on the state level, even though the empire at large was constituted as a monarchy, and so were most of the states. The Kingdom of Prussia was the largest of the constituent states, covering two-thirds of the empire's territory. Several of these states had gained sovereignty following the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire, and had been de facto sovereign from the mid-1600s onward. Others were created as sovereign states after the Congress of Vienna in 1815. Territories were not necessarily contiguous. Many existed in several parts, as a result of historical acquisition, or, in several cases, divisions of the ruling family trees. Some of the existing states, in particular Hanover, were abolished and annexed by Prussia as a result of the War of 1866. Each component of the German Empire sent representatives to the Federal Council and, via single-member districts, the Imperial Diet. Relations between the imperial center and the empire's components were somewhat fluid, and were developed on an ongoing basis. The extent to which the emperor could, for example, intervene on occasions of disputed or unclear succession was much debated on occasion, for example with the Liebdetmolder inheritance crisis. Other maps. Linguistic minorities. About 92% of the population spoke German as the first language. The only minority language with a significant number of speakers was Polish. The non-German Germanic languages language group like Danish, Dutch and Frisian were located in the north and northwest of the empire, near the borders with Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium and Luxembourg. Low German was spoken throughout northern Germany and, though linguistically as separate from High German as from Dutch and English, is considered German, hence also its name. Danish and Frisian were spoken predominantly in the north of the Prussian province of Schleswig-Holstein and Dutch in the western border areas of Prussia. Polish and other Slavic languages were spoken chiefly in the east. A few spoke French, especially in the Reichsland Alsace-Lothringen, where French speakers formed 11.6% of the total population. 1900 census results. Linguistic maps.